finally here. I think it was here probably in an earlier episode too, but like now it feels like it's really here. We're past Fool's Spring, as Lucas has brought up before. Now we're into the real thing, and I'm really looking forward to going around doing some walking in this really lovely looking weather. And yeah, it's the year is starting to turn around weather-wise.
I gotta take my winter tires off, Will.
Oh,
Still got them winter tires on. Aye. It never ends. But yeah, no, everybody, this is not going to mean anything to... Though I've seen people... It's funny, it seems like everywhere has your weather on the East Coast. Like, when I see people from New York are like, wow, it's a beautiful spring day. I'm like, wait, it's spring here in Nova Scotia as well. And people from Toronto seem to be experiencing a beautiful spring day as well. So, despite Canada being such a big country, it seems like almost everyone is enjoying the spring today.
I certainly hope so, and I hope that you are too, listener, who is joining us for another episode of Elwood City Limits, the Episodic Arthur podcast. My name's Will Young. Lucas Mancini is my co-host. And yeah, we're going to be talking about, we're getting very close to the end of the season of Arthur that we find ourselves on. And we're actually recording this right before my vacation. So let's get out of here. No, I'm just kidding. We've got some stuff to say about this penultimate episode of season 16. I keep having to remind myself what season it is, what number it is, I should say. This has been a pretty solid season, all things considered, but it's just the numbering is starting to really, really screw with me. Before we get into that, though, of course, we turn over to our mailbag, elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com, and we do have one piece of correspondence, which, remember, that is where you can send us your correspondence as well. And whether it's to be read on the podcast or whether it is to be read privately, it's all good. This one comes to us from DJ. Hey, Lucas, speaking of, greetings from Ontario, Canada, Will and Lucas. Very interesting. My vacation is going to be taking me to Ontario as well, very briefly. I'm an up-and-coming animator/cartoon artist on the autism spectrum with a pair of animated shorts submitted to film festivals, a couple of illustrated books self-published, and a reasonably popular YouTube channel. More to the point, I've been a religious Arthur viewer for many years since childhood. I've been binging the heck out of your podcast. Elwood City Limits is the most addictive podcast I've gotten into since Talkin' Tunes with Rob Paulson. Wow, that's a pretty big compliment there. The earliest known time I heard about Elwood City Limits was when Patricia from the Old School Lane YouTube channel interviewed Will in 2019. Yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh, that was 4 years ago. That interview is still up on YouTube if you'd like to hear it. It's a little bit of the history of Elwood City Limits and my relationship to Arthur. That's Old School Lane on YouTube. Admittedly, I only listened to the podcast sporadically at first, but by the time I found your YouTube channel in late 2022, that's when I progressively became more and more fond of the fun chemistry between you two as you helped me revisit memories of this top-tier children's cartoon. Lucas really is the Buster to Will's Arthur.
I don't know if you just added an extra inflection on that makes it almost sound like an insult, but no, I know it's a compliment. And I agree. I think that's why this show works.
It was more emphasis because I think that's the dynamic. I mean, we push that dynamic too. That's part of the commissioned art that we got from Rich Morris that you can see on our Facebook header. That's one of my favorite pieces of art that we've gotten from the show. If you don't mind, I'm going to list some of the funniest moments involving you guys in hopes that you'll laugh along with me. So, Lucas, let's see if we can remember some of these.
I don't mind at all. Let's hear the hit list of the top 10 Lucas and Will moments.
Well, I know you love this one, and long-time listeners, we're bringing it up again. Your Todd McFarlane impressions in episode 127 for how they sound like either Peter Griffin or Suze from Gravity Falls.
I'm not familiar with the second reference, but I will say that Norm Macdonald once said that to properly impersonate someone, you have to love them. And I love Todd McFarlane, and I wish that my dream TV show, I don't care about TV, my dream TV show is they make season 4 of Todd McFarlane's Spawn, and they act like it's still the 90s and nothing's changed, and they still let him film his silly little intros.
Next one is Will comparing Telly Monster's looks to Leslie Nielsen in the For the Kids episode of Elmo's World. By the way, since Will didn't know what Telly's personality was, I'll summarize by saying that he is a triangle-loving worrywart. He does look like Leslie Nielsen. I stand by that. Will apparently not knowing until reviewing the episode The Cherry Tree that cherries grew on trees, and Lucas's reaction to this. Yeah, that was yeah. I gotta own that one.
George Washington, bro. He chopped that thing down. Anyway,
well, that's American history. I don't have to know about that. Lucas saying in episode 113 that Arthur's packing heat, much to Will's confusion. What would he be packing heat for, I wonder?
He kept that MFing thang on him. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I know what you're saying now. Maybe in 113, I wasn't so sure. The entire Zaboomafoo April Fool's podcast, especially Lucas's horse-ish rap and mentioning that Future, Designer, and Migos all sound alike. Boy, if you couldn't tell that episode was recorded in 2017, Future, Designer, and Migos will properly date that, especially Designer.
He must be talking about some sort of other podcast. I don't know anything about that.
No, that's true. We briefly hosted it, but I'm not familiar. Before I close off this letter, I'm wishing you luck as you continue your journey through Season 16. There are 2 episodes I'm most excited for you to talk about. Well, we only got like 4 of them left, and they're both Sue Ellen-centered. Sue Ellen veges out for animal hierarchy reasons, and so funny I forgot to laugh, a really infamous episode, almost on Arthur's big hit levels for how grossly out of character Arthur was in it. Thank you for brightening my days with your podcast, and I hope to send in more fan mail soon. Have a great Easter weekend. This one's a little bit older. And we did, I think. Warm regards from DJ. Thank you, DJ. And that's elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. It's true, Lucas, this episode that we're talking about today, as well as the one that we will be talking about next time, have certain degrees of infamy, at least among like the Arthur Discord and Arthur fans that I've seen. So we'll be talking about one of them in just a few moments here. But of course, want to say thank you to everybody who is on our Patreon. Patreon.com/ElwoodCityLimits. You enable us to keep the show going, and you also get little perks along the way, such as getting this episode a week early and all ECL episodes a week early, and access to our side podcasts, such as this month, For the Kids, a PBS Kids podcast where we will be talking about Peep and the Big Wide World. So that's entirely new for us, PBS Kids, and you can also listen to our latest episode of ECL Origins about one of our favorite cartoons ever, Sticking Around. It's a great episode. If you haven't checked it out yet, patrons, make sure that you do. Patreon.com/ElwoodCityLimits. We want to say a special thank you to patrons such as Jake Bailey, Shayna Bennett, Sierra S., Rachel Pearson, Peebs, Matt. We want to say thank you to Owen and to Nicholas DeMarco. Thank you to Sydney Long and to Greenhouse Vinyls. Thank you to Kirsten and to Kelly Corbett. Thank you so much to the Flying Sparks 32 and also to RG and Anthony Williams. Thank you to Jeffrey Norris and Emma. Thank you to Chloe and Dear Miss Elizabeth, a.k.a. Z. And thank you to Cecil Robinson and Thunder Yetta. Many more than that, of course, and I'm keeping track of them on my big old Excel spreadsheet. So if you didn't hear it this time, you will get yours very, very soon. But if you haven't heard yours in a while, feel free to let me know over on Patreon. So thank you to all our patrons as we step into another episode of Arthur here. And as we always, usually like to see, it's a Fern episode, right from the jump. Fern in the case of the stolen story. And the idea here from the cold open, Lucas, is that Fern is trying to think of a story for Muffy's fiction forum, and she just has no ideas.
You can tell that this episode is not from 2023 because Fern would have just gotten ChatGPT to write her story for her.
Ah, yes. In fact, if Arthur had held on just a couple years more, we might have gotten an AI episode, perhaps. Maybe that's again the new thing in Lakewood Elementary is that they get a special AI to write their essays for them or something, which is something that teachers have to watch out for, and the people who mark those teachers' assignments. So, yeah, Fern, totally blanking, has no ideas, and Muffy is having a guest writer at her fiction forum, and Fern imagines that Shakespeare himself, William Shakespeare, is going to come 400 years into the future and basically totally diss her for not having any story ideas.
Listen, I would not want to be in a battle of words with Shakespeare. Real old heads rather, know that Shakespeare could spit with the best of them. You know that guy was a roast legend. You definitely do not want to go toe to toe, or should I say, word for word, with one Billy Shakespeare.
Or sonnet for sonnet.
No, my goodness gracious. Could you imagine it be a bloodbath, Will?
And Fern is so stressed out about this, she even shakes the camera. She gives you and me a little shake to try and think up of an idea. But eventually, as we begin the episode, Fern, very desperate, she does eventually find inspiration from LaDonna. LaDonna hasn't been around as much as I think that we thought that she would be this season, but here she is again. And we're going back to a character trait that she has shown so far, which is that she really likes to tell stories, especially about stories about her family, stories about her life. So Fern listens to her tell a story about her family, and she finds inspiration from this. She makes a whole new story and lifts entire elements from LaDonna's story about her Aunt Mabel. And we see this a couple of times throughout the episode with recurring characters of Fern's, her Detective Watteau and Detective Bastings characters. So this is Fern's take on Hercule Poirot.
Yeah, I know that this is supposed to be a parody of Detective Poirot, but because his name is Detective Watteau, I just think of Watto from Star Wars Episode 1.
Who owes me money, Annie? It's him and Anakin.
Yeah,
Like,
somehow Fern's character is never playing chance dice.
this chance of dice is covered in blood. And I don't feel so good about doing that voice. I can do it. It's just... we're one of the many things we're re-examining from the prequels. You know what he sounds like. He would be looking at, but speaking of voices, though, so we get this whole cutaway. It's this story about Detective Watteau and Bastings, who is Watteau is Fern doing a French accent and with a mustache. Bastings is George, and they have a Sherlock and Holmes kind of chemistry, but Watteau is meant to be like Poirot. They are going after somebody. It's like instead of LaDonna's Aunt Mabel, it's Sable. So the serial numbers are filed off, and it's this kind of detective story. They first suspect that it's Watteau's nemesis,
Brock
the Grey
Lesnar's
Dove.
wife? Brock Lesnar's wife? No, never mind. Keep going. Sorry. I thought that would get a laugh out of you, at least.
No, I didn't hear it at first, and then as you were explaining it, I was like, oh, I get it. I see. So the Grey Dove is Watteau's enemy, who we've seen is Binky. It's Binky in like a typical detective noir story villain role. Again, mustache, like top hat, almost like somebody who would be slinking around the streets of Whitechapel in the 1800s Britain.
He's got a cape.
Yes, he does. He does have a cape. You're right. And what I like most about this, I said, speaking of voices earlier, Binky, Bruce Dinsmore is the actor. We love Bruce Dinsmore. And you can tell that Bruce Dinsmore is Quebec-based because his French accent is fantastic. Binky speaking French sounds great. It's like the most, like, whereas Fern's as Watteau is kind of meant to be a little bit like, what is the word?
It's like Steve Martin as the Pink Panther. Oh, it's when they're talking about, she has a hunch.
Yeah, it's like, I have an hunch. And you hear Bruce Dinsmore as Binky, and it's like so, like, you can tell that he practiced that for years and years. He's really good at it, and it sounds great. So the Grey Dove is the initial suspect, but it's not him. It is this character, Sable, who is this old woman, and eventually she has a jetpack because that was part of LaDonna's story as well. So Fern presents this as a story to the fiction forum. Everybody really loves it, but LaDonna is offended that Fern took elements from her own story without asking. And there's a little bit of tension here, but eventually Fern gets away with it. Lucas, you ever see the movie Secret Window?
Wait, with Johnny Depp? Wait.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. Like, I had a sleepover when I was like 13. I just remember I hated it. I don't remember anything about it.
It's a bad movie. Like, you're right to feel that way. But what really made me laugh is that, LaDonna's got her accent that's kind of like this. And in Secret Window, it's John Turturro doing a similar accent, and they're both essentially saying the same thing. You stole my story. So LaDonna comes up and is just like, hey, you stole my story. And I'm like, it just reminded me of that really bad movie, Secret Window. That was all over the trailers back in 2003. LaDonna is not impressed by this, and Fern again finds herself in writer's block as she there's a bit of tension, but nothing really comes of this at this point. Fern is lost in writer's block again. She even imagines Shakespeare himself, who is also voiced by Bruce Dinsmore, explaining what writer's block is. For any kids who maybe haven't encountered writer's block to this point, it's something that you and I are familiar with, but it might be the first time that kids are dealing with this sort of mental problem that some people can have, writers have all the time. She tries to call LaDonna on the phone, but she's asleep, and she ends up using elements of another story that LaDonna kind of started to tell her, didn't exactly get into the details of, and makes another story about like a clown whose parrot is almost kidnapped by the gray dove.
They're in the Congo.
The Congo, yes. There's a part where they almost get hit with like a suction cup arrow with peanut butter on the end, and Hastings takes the arrow, but it's just got peanut butter on it. And Fern, as Watto says, Watto, she is very allergique.
There's a part where they're using this prop arrow as a clue, and Fern says, only a clown would use this type of, how do you say, prop comedy.
Prop comedy, yeah. That was pretty good. I liked that. Fern had to come up with a second story because they extended Muffy's Fiction Forum another day. So this was her doing this again, and then LaDonna gets more upset that Fern has again stolen a story. So she comes up with a story. You stole my story. On the spot, she tells a story about Ferg, with a G, a cat burglar who steals stories from a character named Ladella. We see Fern as a cat burglar breaking into this mansion, and LaDonna is like a Southern belle in this story. That's if you notice in like the stories, of course, from Fern's point of view, she's Watteau, and in both of her stories, LaDonna's character is either like an old woman or like a clown with weird hair. And then in LaDonna's story, Fern is a thief, and she is like this Southern belle with like a proper dress and like a very sophisticated Southern accent. I also wanted to note here, we see Fern's character in LaDonna's story taking pictures. When was the last time you saw one of those long cameras? You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. No, those cameras are dope. Those cameras are super cool. The cameras that are longer than they are tall. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, a friend of mine actually just purchased one recently, who's like into like old like analog film photography. But you don't see them around that much anymore.
I think sometimes it can be shorthand for like spy camera, because I don't know exactly. Like my sister had one when I was younger, but I never really used it, and I'm not sure if it has any benefits over any cameras that we have today, other than the fact that it's smaller, it can fit in your pocket.
Yeah, you would. I'm no expert. Though, okay, so what's interesting about this is LaDonna is essentially, like we were talking earlier about going sonnet to sonnet with Shakespeare. She's subtweeting Fern with this story. And this is going to be such an outside reference, Will. But like, do you know what autofiction is?
Autofiction. Maybe?
Autofiction is it's a combination of like an autobiographical piece with someone inserts fictional elements, and the line is blurred what's real and what's not.
Okay.
And this has been kind of like a popular postmodern writing technique. There's a very famous Norwegian novel called My Struggle, not to be confused with a different book called My Struggle. But there's this guy, again, this is a really long explanation for this kind of weird aside.
No, I'm into it.
There's this guy, Mike Crumplar, who writes autofiction on Substack about the kind of social scene in Dimes Square, New York.
Okay.
So all these kind of Manhattanite like art kids in Dimes Square, New York. They have this kind of over-the-top lifestyle where this is like the new hit scene. Williamsburg's so over, Will. It's all about Dimes Square. Anyway, this guy, Mike Crumplar, writes autofiction about like hanging out with these people and like partying with them. And similar to this story that LaDonna tells, it just kind of seems like an excuse to like talk bad about all these people and be
Right.
like, yeah, this person did this and says this, and it's you kind of get this like voyeuristic like look into these people's lives. But that's what this. I was like, LaDonna's kind of almost doing auto fiction here.
Interesting. I feel like the closest thing I can think of to autofiction is like, this is such an old example, but like remember that book A Million Little Pieces that was supposedly like a memoir?
Well,
Most of it
apparently
was
that
made
book
up.
is just fiction. Yeah.
Okay. So no autobiographical elements
Listen,
whatsoever.
I'll never forgive Oprah for I was talking to my roommate about that book the other day, and me and my roommate were both lamenting that when we were like 15, we were like, "Whoa, this is so crazy! He was a drug addict, so he had to have dental surgery without any like sedatives because he was addicted to drugs," and we felt so betrayed when we learned that guy made it all up.
Wow, I only barely heard of it when it came out. I'm sorry that it was that it was such a traumatic moment for you.
No, it was mostly us joking about how incensed we were. That's like, it's funny because the book is still enjoyable regardless, but when you're like
Right.
a young, edgy teen, like so much of the thrill is the fact that he actually went through it all. So when there was this big reveal that he lied about it after getting on Oprah's bestseller list. It's just a fun memory, bonding with my roommate over A Million Little Pieces of all things.
Would people really do that? Just go on Oprah and tell lies? So yeah, this devolves into an argument where they both are insulting each other by continuing to make up like, well, my story is going to be about someone named LaBonna, and then LaDonna's like, well, my story is going to be about somebody named Ferd, and insulting each other that way. And then Fern ultimately admits that she was wrong. She just didn't have any ideas for how to proceed forward. And I mean, this is all in one scene. Like, this is at the second day of the fiction forum. Fern admits that she was wrong, and LaDonna eventually makes up with her. They decide that maybe it's better if they write a story together. There's a funny line from Muffy while they were going on this argument, and she says, "Okay, I'm officially bored." And that one got a pop out of me. Them coming together to decide to make a story together is the ending, and we finally get to find out who is the mystery author who will be part of the fiction forum. Of course, it's Ed Crosswire reading from his autobiography, A Deal Like You Wouldn't Believe. Now, I'd actually kind of like to read that.
This was the biggest laugh out of me through the whole episode. And you're right, Will. I, too, would like to read A Deal Like You Couldn't Believe. Just given the quote, the opening line, he really knows how to grab an audience. Who knew Mr. Crosswire was such a good writer? I was born near the dump, but I knew I wasn't garbage.
That's good. Oh, that's the American dream right there. That could be really something. And man, I'd love to see someone in the Arthur community really run with that. You could do some cool stuff. And now a word from us kids. This is a little bit more straightforward, not as much to say. A third grade class is pairing off, and they're doing a team project where one person is a writer and one person is a storyteller. So one person thinks of a true story, and then the other adds details to make it more interesting or funnier or just like wackier, essentially. It's pretty much, and they use the kids drawing art style that we've seen in this segment many, many times, where they animate the kids' drawings that go along with the story.
Reminiscent of the show we talked about on For the Kids.
Yeah.
Sticking around. You can see that kind of DNA in here.
Mm-hmm. And one of the kids is named Saeed, and his story is about being Super Saeed. I thought he was very cute. And there's one other one where they're talking about doing zero-gravity soccer. Now, they don't go into the details of it, but, like, zero-gravity soccer, wouldn't that just be blitzball without water?
I was just going to say, isn't that blitzball?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's like Rocket League without the cars.
Sure. All right. What is that different? Okay. Is Moroccan League different than F1 or
Rocket League? Not Moroccan. Did you say Moroccan League?
I heard Moroccan League. Yes, Rocket League without the cars. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I just got blitzball vibes from this. Maybe those kids will grow up to represent the Xanarkand Abes. Supporting this podcast is how it keeps going, and it's very easy to do. So here's how you can do that. If you're listening to this show and want to get the full back catalog of Elwood City Limits and all of its sister shows and offshoots, you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and even more services. You can also go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/Elwood City Limits, for the full back catalog. If we aren't on a service you use, please let us know. You can interact with us on social media. We're on Twitter @ECL Podcast, Instagram @Elwood City Limits, and twitch.tv/Elwood City Limits Pod for our occasional streams. We're also on Facebook and Tumblr. Feel free to reach out to us on social media, or you can email us, and your email might be read on the show, elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. Finally, for exclusive content including entire side series like For the Kids, a PBS Kids podcast, and ECL Origins, subscribe to us for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Elwood City Limits. That's all for now. Thanks a lot for listening, and now back to the show. And now, apparently, to a controversial episode. Sue Ellen veges out. Now, I'd be interested, of course, to listen to reception from patrons and listeners alike. Usually, like a couple hours after we post the episode on Patreon, people are right on that, which I love. I love that. I really do. So I hope that we can kind of understand this episode's reputation, or maybe even in talking about it, we'll kind of figure out what sticks and what doesn't. So in the cold open, Sue Ellen is talking about how recently she made friends. She went to a farm and made friends with a pig named Sally. Now, to be clear, when I say that, Sally is not a funny animal. She is a pig. She is a pig who cannot talk. And
dear listener, if this is the first time listening to Elwood City Limits, there's a little thing we like to call the animal hierarchy, where sometimes in Arthur, he's a famous aardvark, as we all know, but then sometimes you see other animals that are just regular who don't wear clothes and talk like Arthur's animal friends, and you think to yourself, well, this doesn't make any sense. How is this? And we've learned to just kind of not think about it too much, but every once in a while, an episode comes around and it really just throws it in our face, where it's just impossible to ignore, so we have to sound like a broken record and bring it up again. And this might be, in seasons and seasons and seasons, the most flagrant example of the animal hierarchy I've ever seen. At first I was like, maybe this is why it's controversial, because my head was spinning thinking about Sue Ellen and her pig friend and the ethical implications of everybody else in this episode based off this moment.
Well, and she goes out of her way to say Sally is a very smart pig. Like, she knows how to do tricks. She knows how to do basically like stuff you would teach a dog, and that's what endears Sue Ellen to her so much.
Has there been a pig person in Arthur? Like, usually the one we see is like, there's only one episode where duck people show up. It's when Muffy has movers, and then since then we've only ever seen non-anthropomorphized ducks. But have we ever seen a pig man?
Not. I'm doing the search right now. So kind of. There was Andy Warthog, which is the Andy Warhol sub in. So he is a warthog, but that's different from a pig, like a farm pig. There is a category of pigs on the Arthur Wiki. So, and thank you, because I can't remember all of them. So, pigs who have appeared in the Arthur series. We've got Sally in this episode. We've got Snooter, who is Nadine's imaginary friend, I think. It's in the imaginary friend category. Andy Warthog, and then there's Casey Tulips, who was the TV host who interviewed Matt Damon. It's a parody of Charlie Rose. So we see him in one episode. So there are two. There's one. He's a pig, and Andy Warthog is a warthog. So kinda, yeah. Like, we've also seen, like, despite the dog and baby episodes, like, Pal is mostly, meant to be like just a dog, and we have seen dog kids as well many times. Like that, like this really does harken back to like the very early episodes of the show. This is something we latched onto, and it's a hallmark of that time. And occasionally it comes back to haunt us, because it's just like, I even wrote down, oh God, the animal hierarchy, because it's just, so she's a smart pig, Sue Ellen, what are you if not a smart version of your own animal?
Yeah, remember when everyone was going camping and they were scared of a bear? And it was like Brain was there?
Yeah. It's weird, and we don't have any answers for it. It's just funny to bring it up when it shows up. So,
well, okay, wait, it's extra, but this is why it's extra weird in this episode, because this episode is all about how, because Sue Ellen had this moment with this pig, she has decided to become vegetarian.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's always weird to think about the animal hierarchy, but it's extra weird to think about it in the context of this episode, because it's like, do these guys, like, well, how do these guys feel about eating animals, given that they are all of them? It's just... You can't think about it too much, or else you start to get a headache.
You start to get into Zootopia areas where it's just we get into like the predator prey dynamic, which is clearly something that Arthur never meant to do. So it is a little bit weird and something it's not prepared to confront necessarily. So yeah, like you said, Sue Ellen, in making friends with Sally, decides to become a vegetarian. This is very shocking to her friends. She tells them during Lakewood Elementary's celebration of Cinco de Mayo. And she asks for a meatless dish. She has a calabacita, which, as I'm to understand, is a zucchini or squash-based recipe. So she has this, and her friends are very shocked that she's apparently not eating meat anymore. There's shock of just like, what, you mean you're not eating bacon anymore? You're not eating like burgers or whatever? And Muffy shows up. First of all, did you see Muffy's lunch here? Like she has to be getting it from outside, because she's got like a sirloin steak, mashed potatoes, and onions. It's like, I'm going to the keg tomorrow. That's what I'm gonna get.
Yeah, it's not on theme for the Cinco de Mayo stuff that everybody else is eating. Which, by the way, this is the rare time. We're kind of cheating, because I was just listening to a wrestling podcast talking about events coming up on Cinco de Mayo. We're pretty far still from May 5th.
Yeah.
Maybe for the free listeners, this will be a little bit closer, but it's one of the rare moments where the Arthur episode we're watching, it's kind of syncing up with the season that we're currently in right now, which I thought was fun. But yeah, Muffy's like, she's got mashed potatoes and gravy. Everybody else is eating Mexican food.
and it's Muffy, so it's got to be like top tier. So Muffy makes reference a couple times in this episode to a very minor character we've seen before, Capri DeVapida, which is a celebrity, like a Paris Hilton style celebrity that Muffy really follows and fawns over. So Capri DeVapida is going vegetarian, so Muffy decides to do that, especially after Francine says that she couldn't last one day. So Muffy decides to go vegetarian essentially as a challenge, and is very gung-ho about it, but she's finding it more challenging than Sue Ellen. So I think I should have mentioned this at the top. Don't watch this episode if you're hungry. There's a lot of really good-looking food in this, especially if you're a meat eater. Man, I would feel bad for you if your stomach was empty. I've been having indigestion all day, so I couldn't get hungry by anything.
Not included in the good-looking food, however, is when they go to Chicken Licken.
Yeah.
And this is Impossible Whopper, Impossible Burger, that infamous meme of the guy's mouth agape pointing at the imitation chicken nuggets. There's all of those options of arriving at fast food places. So they go to the Chicken Licken, ask what they have that's vegetarian, and what they have is a pickle slice with mustard on it. That's the only vegetarian thing that they offer, which I think even in like 2013, we were starting to get like places that had veggie burgers, and those were pretty, like, if you dress them up right, you could barely tell. Like, I remember the first time I had a veggie burger was by accident from Harvey's, and it was like just as good as the burger. So most fast food places by then, and of course you have other options like McDonald's has the Filet-O-Fish, which is, it's also a type of like meat alternative, so it's not exactly like imitation meat or something like that. So in 2013, not a crazy thing, but yeah, the only meatless thing is the pickle with mustard, which, like, yeah, I'm gonna need a bit more than that, dog. They go into Chicken Licken because they're in the mall, and Muffy completely doesn't even think about the fact that chicken is also meat. The idea is that, throughout this episode, Muffy and later Francine are getting into vegetarianism essentially on a dare, whereas Sue Ellen's comes from a deeply held belief that she has thought about and made a decision on, and she's quietly, not implied, but it's pretty much like she has the right approach to vegetarianism versus Muffy and Francine. Muffy is doing it because it's fashionable,
and because she was challenged. And in the scene after the mall, Muffy is actually going back to eating meat because Capri DeVapida changed her diet back to meat eating. And so she gets a little bit of guff from Francine, but Muffy goes back at her and says that Francine couldn't give up meat for one day. So Francine, on a dare, goes meatless, and she says, I'm not eating any meat for the rest of my life. And all this whole time, as Muffy and Francine are going through this, Sue Ellen's in the background just like, hey, guys, like, no, that's not supposed... You don't have to do it this way.
Right. There's a part where Francine's... Or Muffy, rather, is trying to see, how fast and loose with these rules she could be. Her dad is like... They're like carving up a roast beast or something.
It's like mutton or something.
Yeah, and Muffy calls Sue Ellen to ask if it counts if like meat accidentally falls into her mouth. Does that count as breaking her vegetarianism? And this is where Sue Ellen says, you don't have to do this. No one's telling you that you have to be a vegetarian. You simply could just like do whatever you want. And Sue Ellen, Muffy rather says... She's like, and let Francine be able to rub it in? Absolutely not. So she continues trying to be vegetarian.
And since we are just leaving Easter as we're recording this, for all you Catholics out there, it's like I used to play the same game of Lent of like, what if I go somewhere and I accidentally have snack food? Like, what if I accidentally have chips? Does that count? Am I going to hell? So it's a little bit of a similar like game of like
I gave up TikTok for Lent this year, which I didn't actually re-download and open the app of TikTok the whole time. However, every once in a while, I like to watch streamer XQC on Twitch. I like watching XQC streams.
Okay.
When he's very lazy, he'll do a TikTok react stream where he's watching TikTok, so I'm watching someone else watch TikTok. And that felt a little wrong. That felt a little bit not kosher. But I would not be seeking it out. I'd be like, I'm watching my XQC stream, and it's like, okay, time for TikTok. I'd be like, ugh. But I think what made it feel so wrong, it was like I was still getting that dopamine hit of like, so much content so quickly.
Was it on a Sunday? Because if it was, then that's okay.
Are you allowed to do it on a Sunday? See, I'm not up with my Lent rules.
That's a little known Lent hack that I figured out when I was, I used to be very religious when I was younger. And yeah, Sunday is a feast day, so you're allowed to do that on Sunday.
Well, no, not only did I not do that, I don't think I'm going to re-download TikTok, Will, which is a far cry from this show. If you've been listening for like over 4 years, I've been always the one explaining TikTok to Will, but I think I want it out of my life, so... and also my work emailed everybody that it has to be off of their work phones.
Okay.
I think I'm done with TikTok for the time being.
There's that's a good way to live, and now you can move to Instagram Reels with all the other old millennials like me.
Ew. No, I know. People keep asking me like, are you just gonna watch Instagram Reels now? And I'm like, never.
No,
thank you.
No, it's just reposted TikTok. It's literally the same thing, and somehow worse. So yeah, Francine is going meatless. She goes with Sue Ellen to Brain's mom's ice cream shop for vegetarian frozen yogurt, which appears to be frozen yogurt with like a cucumber slice in it, maybe.
Well, this is weird, too, because they're not saying that they're going to be vegan. So I was under the impression that regular ice cream was vegetarian, right? Like, it's only veganism when you're not allowed to have any animal byproduct. For instance, there's a part later on when Francine is trying to abstain from eating meat, and her sister gives her a big thing of cheese, which again would not be an option for a vegan.
Yes.
My roommate's vegan, so I hear about this stuff. Or no, excuse me, my roommate's vegetarian, so I hear about these differences all the time.
Gotcha. Okay.
But so yeah, it's weird that you would need a vegetarian frozen yogurt.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know how vegetarian it is with like a slice of whatever vegetables in there. So Muffy, unfortunately, being a bad friend, is tempting Francine and Sue Ellen, but mostly Francine. She brings over double Bubsy burgers, which are so aromatic. It's literally like, it's like the pie on the windowsill aroma that's going around, and Francine is very tempted. I'm like, as I said before, I've had indigestion all day. I feel terrible, and I'm almost glad that I did watching this so that I didn't get hungry for this delicious looking cheeseburger. In fact, Francine is so swept up in it that she begins to see the burger is talking to her. They reuse an old character model. Remember the episode, the Binky's Nightlight episode?
Wait, this is the same? Okay, it's funny that you say that, because I wrote down that this is some classic Arthur nightmare fuel. Classic, like, Arthur horrifying situation. And I thought it was reminiscent of that Binky's Nightlight episode with the big scary burger. Little do I know they literally used the same, like, model. That's crazy.
Yeah, it basically is, and just like the burger begging to be eaten, and Francine literally is talking to it, and Sue Ellen has to be like, "Snap out of it, Francine! What are you doing?" So yeah, and you mentioned like Catherine later on. Francine's back at home. Muffy delivers a huge like meat heavy order of Chinese food to the place, and again, sounds great. If I didn't have indigestion, I'd be way hungrier. While Catherine is mentioning that when you go vegetarian, and she seems to be speaking from experience, so maybe Catherine is vegetarian as well. She's talking about the virtues of eating nuts, seeds, and then later cheese to make sure you get your protein, because you can't just you need to get protein even if you're a vegetarian. And she says nuts and seeds are great sources of protein, which I agree. And Francine says a great source of protein. Yeah, if you're a squirrel. Well, Francine, maybe you are. I don't know. Maybe there are squirrel people in Elwood City. What do I know?
Yeah,
there are apparently pigs and pig people, so...
It's Francine being speciest in this moment.
God. Oh, let's not even think about if we need to bring that kind of a term in here.
Yeah.
So,
had she been talking about Italians, would she be like, oh yeah, you're eating a lot of spaghetti and meatballs?
It's a great source of protein. Yeah, if you're Italian.
If you're Italian, yeah, prosciutto is a really great source of protein. If you're one of those Italians.
Gabagool. Muffy is really trying to tempt Francine, and Francine gives the Chinese food to the rest of her family and like facetiously thanks Muffy the next day. So Muffy's big final plan to get back at Francine and get her to break is to organize a potluck dinner with all of the kids and ensure that everybody brings a meat dish. And so they all bring it. They all look pretty good. Now, one of the things, I mean, we see a couple of the different, like Binky brings hot dogs. Fern brings a shepherd's pie that she made with lamb? I've never heard of that before. I
mean, it's a pretty literal shepherd's pie, eh?
Yeah. I'm sure it can be done. I'm just used to, like, it would have to be ground lamb, I suppose, because shepherd's pie is usually ground beef. At least in my estimation. I was just, like, kind of weirded out by that. Francine and Sue Ellen are also invited. They bring vegetarian dishes. Sue Ellen's is like a kind of decorated up, I forget the exact term for it, but it's like a cauliflower with stuff on it, which cauliflower. And
cauliflower.
Francine brings ratatouille, I believe, or is it risotto?
Two very different dishes, Will. I mean, ratatouille would make more sense because ratatouille is literally just a bunch of vegetables.
Yeah, it's ratatouille. Vegetables. It's got to be ratatouille. You think I remember because the name Ratatouille. They get inside. They gave the plates to Muffy. This is one of the rudest things that Muffy's done in a long time. Not in front of them, but she goes to the kitchen and she dumps both of their plates into the garbage. It's so mean. Like, man. Like, I know she's trying to get back at Francine, but that is like way past the social boundary. That is messed up.
If anybody, there's a lot of good Arthur Savage moments on YouTube, but they're mostly comprised of earlier episodes, like episodes from seasons 1 to 3. This definitely needs to be placed in a Arthur Savage moments compilation.
So there's very little vegetable dishes left. It's all a lot of meat stuff. It looks really good. There is also just like a large towering plate of spaghetti and meatballs. So like that you can just, you can just take a forkful from or something. It's just a weird way to serve that. So Muffy is trying to make Francine feel like she has to eat meat, but Francine grabs some collard greens, which I've never had collard greens before. I've never had the opportunity.
Good.
I bet they seem good.
How much hip hop from the West Coast have you listened to, Will? Because they talk about collard greens quite a bit. So maybe I was predisposed to enjoy it by listening to that music so much. But I like collard greens quite a lot. They have a bit like if you get like Boneyard's barbecue.
Oh, Boneheads?
Yeah, Boneheads rather. Yeah, Boneyard. I don't know. It's late. We're recording later than we usually do.
Yeah, that's all right.
At Bonehead's barbecue, you could get collard greens on the side.
Ooh, okay, I gotta go back there. Especially if they're collard greens as LaDonna made them here, cooked in duck fat. And then Muffy uses that as her gotcha to see that Francine is actually eating something that has been cooked with animal product. And this is the bridge too far for Sue Ellen, and she gets very angry, and she explains to everybody she's been getting up to the point of telling everybody why she's vegetarian, but they've kind of stopped her. And she angrily explains that she stopped eating meat because some animals, like Sally in the cold open, are her friends, which is a very, I think, I don't want to say, because I'm not a vegetarian. I've never been a vegetarian, but among younger vegetarians, especially in media, that seems to be like, I think of like Lisa Simpson or Emma from Degrassi, The Next Generation. It's just finding out that like, oh, I like animals a lot and I don't want to eat them because I consider them my friends, which is like, that's a very normal starting point for some young vegetarians and makes a lot of sense. And she's just very angry that Muffy and Francine would kind of treat it in the way that she's done, especially Muffy trying to like get back at Francine. So she kind of storms out. Muffy and Francine apologize.
Here's a little story from my life. This is for the we're gonna get really into it here with this episode. I had a long-term girlfriend in high school, and one Canada Day, we ordered an extra large meat lovers pizza. And sat down and watched the movie Okja when it came out on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever seen the movie Okja, Will?
Yeah, I've seen Okja.
And so upon watching Okja, I've never seen such, and I was around, when family members had passed away in this girl's life, and I had never seen such a visceral, emotional reaction from anything than when she watched the movie Okja. And from that moment on, and to this girl's credit, she's absolutely stuck to this. She was a vegetarian forevermore. And so that meat lover's pizza was the last morsel of meat she ever had, because she was so inspired to go vegetarian by the movie Okja. If you've ever seen the movie Okja, dear listeners, you would kind of understand. That movie definitely does give you a little bit of a guilt trip about eating meat, especially because everybody acts like the Okjas would be so tasty.
Well, and with film and TV and books, sometimes it just takes seeing things from a different perspective to change your perspective. So I can totally understand how something like that could happen from a movie like Okja, which has a more prominent pro-environmental message than a lot of others do. Muffy and Francine make up and decide to have some of the meat dishes there, but the episode ends with Sue Ellen going back to school. They are serving meatless dishes, and in fact, they are doing so because Muffy and Bailey, mostly Bailey, are providing meatless dishes for Meatless Mondays at the cafeteria. They are trying to be more respectful and inclusive of Sue Ellen's choices. They are still going to eat meat, but they want to make sure that Sue Ellen has has enough options and as many as the other kids have in being vegetarian. So that's pretty cool. Like that's a neat way to leave that off. All right, so we've got a Fern episode and a Sue Ellen episode, two characters that don't get a lot of play all that much in terms of their own feature, and you could argue that maybe one of them doesn't. So let's go back. Fern in the Case of the Stolen Story. Lucas, how did this one strike you?
Well, it wasn't, for all you Fern lovers out there, it wasn't quite a Fern episode because it's just as much of a LaDonna episode as it is a Fern episode in a way.
Right.
And it also doesn't really feel that true to Fern. I don't know. Her plagiarizing LaDonna's stories. Maybe it's because we like Fern, so we don't like seeing her in a kind of unflattering light. But I was like, this doesn't seem like something Fern would do. And sure, she explains that she has writer's block, and that's why she's been able to be so creative and write poetry before. But I don't know, something about this doesn't ring true to the character. Really, the highlights of these episodes are kind of the episode within the episode that takes place in Fern's stories, where everybody's talking with French accents and Binky is the gray dove. That stuff is really the kind of most entertaining part. Anytime we're in the real world, and it's just people kind of getting mad at each other about stealing each other's fictional work, I kind of checked out a little bit. I will say the highlight of the episode for me is the part when we're kind of having this big reveal where LaDonna's calling out Fern for stealing her stories, and they're both kind of trying to one-up each other by making up stories on the spot to expose one another, and Muffy kind of is like, can we just, neither of these stories are very interesting. Like, Muffy just cares about the literature and the quality of the literature, and I liked that moment. But yeah, this was kind of a clunker for me. What did you think, Will?
I agree. I didn't really like this. And I must say that this is not the first Fern Spotlight episode to be like one of the worst of its season. And I don't think, I've said before, Fern's one of my favorite characters. And I think that a lot of times when you give her the spotlight, she can give you something that you can't get from a lot of other characters. But I don't know. It seems that sometimes they don't really know what to do with her. And in this case, I wouldn't put the blame on, having it be a LaDonna episode. Like, it's whatever. Like, I see the episode they're trying to do. I just didn't think it was all that interesting, to be honest with you. Like, the fact the addressing plagiarism, I think, is something that is interesting. And they don't name it as plagiarism, but, passing off someone else's ideas as your own. I think that's something you can introduce to kids at this age. Just for whatever reason, I wasn't really feeling it. Like the Watteau stuff, honestly, I can kind of take or leave. I think the voices they do are funny, and they do at least add some visual interest. But it's also just like, okay, well, we're doing this for the next 3 minutes, so whatever. And yeah, the actual conflict was solved like really, really quickly. So it just felt a little flimsy, and yeah, I didn't really care for it. Again, I'd be interested to know what kind of the general reaction is to Sue Ellen Veges Out, because I think I fall more on the stage of liking it. Like, I'm not crazy about it. I think it's pretty good. And I do think that the message that it's going for is communicated fairly well. The problem is that it's just kind of not Sue Ellen's episode for a lot of it. It's a Francine and Muffy episode. Sue Ellen makes her decision early on and doesn't really change. Things are changed around her. Muffy and Francine eventually learn more about Sue Ellen's choice and decide to help her. She's kind of more of the inciting incident to everything going on. So we do learn about Sue Ellen's decision, but it's pretty surface level. Like, we don't see her wrestling with it. We don't see her really doing much to come to terms with the fact that she's vegetarian and how maybe that could conflict with her life as it is already. It's not easy to just stop eating a whole sector of food, especially if that's, you're so young and you have to think of like, okay, how are you going to get your protein now? And I think there could have been a way to do this that incorporated her a lot more. Also, we've been more on Muffy's side lately. She's been pretty good so far. This is really feels like a backslide into like Muffy is straight up rude in this one in many ways that we pointed out. And that's too bad. I mean, Muffy does slot into the antagonist role whenever they need her to. But now when she does, it's kind of like, this feels like we are throwing away a little bit of the goodwill earned from episodes where she is the protagonist. So I appreciate what it's going for, and there are stuff about it that I like, and it was also kind of fun to talk about in terms of the animal hierarchy and also the type of food. I thought there was very interesting food on display. But again, I would say I'm a bit more on the positive side, maybe just like the positive side of mid, I suppose, just because I think that for the message that they wanted to impart, I think they could have done it a bit differently and maybe been more effective and also used more of a character who doesn't get a lot of use anyway.
I am so happy, Will, that I knew you said that this episode was kind of controversial, but I haven't read any of the sentiment. I'm excited to see what people say in the Discord, because I had no idea what we were getting into going into it. And I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised. At the start of this episode, when it's Sue Ellen playing with the pig, I thought I could see the whole episode in my mind's eye.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, she's going to be hanging out with this pig, and she's going to try and be vegetarian, and she's going to tell it to the group, and they're not going to understand it, and maybe they're going to try and make her not be vegetarian anymore. So I was actually somewhat pleasantly surprised to see that the episode wasn't a Sue Ellen episode at all, and it was about... It's not about... the merit of being a vegetarian or respecting your friend's decision. It's about like the difference between doing something because you ideologically believe in it and doing something for like clout or to one up someone or out of like spite, which once again is the kind of angle and the kind of moral that I feel like only Arthur can achieve, given its audience, right? I think a lesser children's show would just make this about, oh, my friend wants to be vegetarian and I don't understand it, and then at the end I have to respect their decision. Only Arthur could make it about, like, you shouldn't do something out of spite. You should do something because you legitimately, earnestly want to do it and believe in it.
Yeah.
So I actually, I liked this episode. I thought it was fairly entertaining. Lots of funny lines, meat. It's so meaty.
A symphony of flavors.
It's like a symphony performed in the key of meat.
Yeah.
So I was throughfully entertained, and I liked that it wasn't it was a nuanced moral with a little bit of depth. And I kind of, for one, I think I've come around to being a full-on Muffy fan here. So I even like it when she goes back into cartoonishly evil Muffy mode. Because it's nice to have just, like, a character that's just straight up bad. And a bad intentionally, right? Like, sometimes I feel that way about Brain, where I'm just like, oh man, I can't stand Brain in this episode. But I don't feel like the writers want me to feel that way. I think the writers want us to be like, wow, that's really wild that Buffy dumped their Ratatouille into the garbage. So I liked it.
Yeah, and of course she's not above learning from this experience and getting better. So she doesn't end the episode as a villain, but she does dabble in it a little bit here. So yeah, we only have one episode left of season 16 before we're going to have to wrap it all up and keep on going to the next season. So thank you very much for listening to us talk about this episode of Arthur here on Elwood City Limits. As I said before, later this month, we will be having our next episode of For the Kids, a PBS Kids podcast, and we got quite a few submissions from patrons about what shows we should be covering. One of the ones with the most suggestions was Peep in the Big Wide World, so that's what we will be talking about. That's a first-time watch for Lucas and I. That's on patreon.com/Elwood City Limits. Next ECL episode is the season finale of season 16, and as I said before, and as DJ said in our email segment, this is another one that is quite controversial. I did not think that it was controversial on the level of Arthur's big hit, which, whoa, you got to be careful when you invoke that in Arthur circles. That's a serious accusation, and that would be so funny I forgot to laugh. And the episode it is paired with is The Best Day Ever. So that will be the final episode of ECL Season 16, which will be coming your way very, very soon. I am making my way towards vacation as it's my anniversary, and I will be heading off to Toronto for a couple of days. By the time you hear this, sorry if I'm not able to see you in Toronto, but I need a little bit of me time, if you don't mind. So let's hope for safe travels to you as well, Lucas, and hopefully the Toronto weather is just as good as the ones we've been having here in Nova Scotia.
Yes, I safe travels to the 6.
Yeah, yes, I'll be going through the 6 with my woes. God, oh my God, I'm so old. Nobody says that anymore. Let's get out of here. That's Elwood City Limits. Thanks a lot for joining us for this episode, and we'll see you. Nope, I don't say that yet. Thank you for joining us for this episode. My name is Will Young, and for Lucas Mancini.
Only a clown would use this type of, how you say, prop comedy.
We'll see you next time.